I disagree, but
recording in progress. So awesome to see you again, Andy. And it's great for everybody that's hopefully tuning in to get to do another episode of the Future Foundry. And as usual, before we get started, Andy, give me your resume.
Well, thank you. For the fifth time, my name is Andy Kravlicha. I am a future strategist for municipalities in Sweden and the public sector. I currently work for the municipality of Huddinge, which has about 115,000 inhabitants and about 7,000 employees. And I work with innovation management, future management, the ideas of what is a city and what is it supposed to be and how is it supposed to change with the times, because the times, they are changing. Thank you very much.
And as I keep on saying, I think you're pretty much the most interesting person that I know, just because you combine these two facets that are usually seen as mutually exclusive, which is municipalities and innovation. And I think it's a really cool way of you actually turning a lot of my preconceived notions on their head, as I could imagine a lot of the listeners.
Well, let me shoot that right back at you and say you're one of the most interesting people I know, because you combine the two diametrically opposite points of view of, capitalist business development and sustainability, because, this whole kind of predatory capitalism thing has gotten a bad rap in sustainability circles, and you're doing something to change that.
Well, I mean, it has, hasn't it? And I think well-deservedly so every once in a while, but I also think it's the whole idea of not throwing out the baby with the bathwater either. So I think one of the problems I'm seeing a lot is the idea that capitalism is a major problem for sustainability. And I'm generally, like a broken record, always trying to reiterate and say that it's not capitalism, it's consumerism, and it's a bunch of other things that are essentially the problem. And that's actually one of the points we're here to discuss today, isn't it? The whole idea of a circular business model and circular economies. So
that's right. This idea came from a viewer, listener. So thank you very much for that. And we've devoted an episode to that. So you guys do matter. If you have an idea for an episode, do let us know, and we will definitely work it into the board.
Yeah, because we do have a board. Every time we talk about which topic we're going to talk about, we generally tend to pick one from the board, don't we?
I thought you were going to say we do have listeners.
Well, I'm not too sure about that. I'm sure about the board, but I'm not sure about the listeners. So no, but I am sure about the listeners, because I do see the numbers going up. So I'm really, really grateful for that people find our ramblings interesting. But I think, the best way to get started with the whole, circular business development, we need to have some sort of a definition, don't we? Or at least some sort of an explanation for the people listening in. And I think the difficult part is always kind of getting the definition down. But the best thing that I could possibly think of that is the easiest way to explain this is the idea that a general kind of linear economy has, as I usually try and tell it, 4 pretty fundamental steps. And that is that you manufacture something that you then sell to a consumer who then uses it. And when they're done using it, they throw it away. And those 4 kind of easy overhead steps are the linear economy. And the idea behind the circular economy, of course, is how do we actually turn that straight line into a loop, which means that when you throw something away, how does that actually become the input into manufacturing? Or, well, it could actually be not only manufacturing, it could go into other facets of that process, but at least it doesn't just go to waste and then nothing more happens with it. Mm-hmm. And what it isn't, and that's another place I want to start, because this is something that I get asked a lot when it comes to circular stuff, is in Europe, we're big fans of incinerating waste, which means that if you get plastics, for example, we like to reuse and possibly recycle the plastics, but the unrecyclable plastics, they get incinerated for heat. Technically, is that a part of the circular economy? And no, it isn't, because that residual heat isn't really, well, we could do a lot better than just make heat out of it. So we're going to talk here on a little bit more of an advanced kind of level. At least that's my idea. But I want to get started somewhere. And that's the whole idea, that I think there's so many companies that are having problems with this because they have the basic linear structure built when they produce their products. And of course, we're kind of focusing a little bit on the actual production side here because, well, circular economy, you can apply that to code and a lot of different things as well. But I think it's the best way of telling the story is usually through an actual product.
Well, isn't it the case that, I'm sorry, just to butt in, but isn't it the case that part of the hang up with the circular economy is extracting the value back from the product you get back? So when that's easy to do, when the value is easy to recover, there's really not much to talk about. And we really do already apply circular economy principles. So the point where it becomes interesting is when we apply it to physical products where the value is more difficult to obtain back.
And let's start where it's simple. I mean, with cars, for example, with cars, we've had laws in place since forever that they're supposed to be recyclable up to a certain point. And up until a couple of years back, it was 95%. I'm pretty sure right now it's 98%, which means that when a manufacturer of a car manufactures a car, they manufacture with the basic idea that it's going to be recyclable up to a 98% level. So then it's kind of built to be recycled. And obviously, I think when we sum up this episode, hopefully within the next 30 minutes or so, I think that's going to be one of the big takeaways, is the idea that you have to design for circularity. But the cool thing with cars is that you can obviously, just by walking up and looking at your car, a lot of the parts are probably quite easy to identify what they are, what they do, and how you can take them apart. So the car is obviously being built for being, a lot more circular than so many other products that we see out there in real life.
Well, the car is mechanically assembled in an assembly line where things are fastened together in certain predictable ways. And the car basically can be drawn up as an exploded diagram of moving and non-moving parts. So it's like a Meccano set. And if it's easy to put together, it's relatively easy to take apart. It's much more difficult to do it with, for instance, a piece of fashion or, plastic, which you've injection molded into something, where it's more difficult to get the components in the plastic back, because there are chemical processes involved and so on. So, I'd like to kind of drill into your experience of different businesses and how easy it is for them to shift to a circular model based on that principle.
And I think this is kind of cool because one thing that IKEA, I was going to explain which kind of company IKEA is. I mean, isn't that kind of the Swedish curse on the world? Everybody knows IKEA nowadays. Well, is it a curse or is it a blessing? I mean, since I live in Italy, we love to go to IKEA and buy Swedish meatballs and stuff.
So, I mean, as long as the meatballs are cheap, it's a blessing for sure.
And here in Italy, it's like, is it Swedish polpette or Italian polpette? And I mean, polpette is meatballs then, obviously. And it's like, there is a difference, but I'm not sure what it is, but they are different. When you have Italian meatballs, they are different from Swedish meatballs. I think that's going to have to be a future episode. But one thing that IKEA started talking about really early is the two concepts of separability and repairability. And that's actually a really good analogy for the car as well, or not analogies. It can really be well applied to a car because a car is being built with those, kind of basic ideas in mind. And it's just being by necessity, because if you buy a car and you spend, I don't know what, 20,000, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 euros on a car, obviously, if you get into a fender bender, you don't want to throw out the car when you're done. I mean, you want to be able to replace the fender. So the idea of replaceability, it's been fundamental for cars because they're out there in the real world and they're banging around. I mean, that doesn't apply to your sweatshirt or your a lot of different things you have in your house, your drinking glass or, whatever. So that makes cars kind of interesting. And that's what IKEA started, really implementing on their furniture. So the idea is that if they produce a piece of furniture, it's supposed to be able to be taken apart, and it's supposed to be able to be taken apart into its components, i.e., as you said, if you injection mold plastics into something, it's going to be hard to actually separate those things. With IKEA furniture, the idea is that they're supposed to be also by material separated into different things, because if you do that, circular economy becomes so much easier. Obviously, I mean, because then you can, take your plastics out, you can take your, your metals out or your whatever's out, and then you can reuse those again. And if you're talking about metals, for example, I mean, they've got infinite recyclability or reusability because they don't degrade every time you kind of reuse them in something new, whilst plastics and paper and things like that, the cells, they degrade, which means that you can't recycle paper more than I think it's like 7 times. Usually, is that how many times you
You
can
can't
fold the paper?
fold it more than 7 times. You can't recycle it more than 7 times. Magic numbers.
Yeah. I mean, that means that I'm just probably making that number up. But let's put it this way: you can recycle the paper less than 10 times, and after that, the fibers are just going to turn into mush, which means that you can't really recycle them at that point any further. So that's where metals are really good for this, of course. So the whole concept then of being able to separate things and being able to repair things are easy. So we've talked about separation for a while. And I mean, that's all well and good, because if you separate things, you can recycle. That's perfectly fine. But then comes repairability. And that's kind of where IKEA has had a problem, because I mean, if you take your bookshelf, your Billy, and you've broken it, which I think a lot of people have, you can take it into IKEA, but you can't really have it repaired, can you? Nowadays, you can buy, you can buy parts for your furniture, and the idea is
right.
that if
You can buy an individual shelf plane, or you can buy a back piece, or yeah, exactly. Which in a way that you weren't able to do before.
Yeah, because I mean, then obviously being IKEA, they just felt that we'd rather just sell you a completely new bookshelf rather than, part of one. And obviously now as mounting pressure of sustainability has kind of come upon them, and they're doing a really good job in sustainability. The idea for them is being, okay, if we implement the whole idea of being able to separate things and repair things, they actually have a pretty good model, because the customers assemble the pieces themselves. So they come in pieces from the very beginning. And this is actually a funny story. My sister, she used to live in LA. She lives in Sweden now, but she used to live in LA, and she's a vegan. I mean, if you're going to be a vegan, you need to live in LA, right? and she had this term that she always used, and that was vegan by accident. And that is like, and I think one of the more famous one is if you want to have an ice cream with the Swedish ice creams that are available for you, Piggelin is usually one you want to go. And it's like a pear, it's a popsicle, a pear tasting popsicle, and that is fully vegan. And she always says it's vegan by accident. They just had no idea that it was going to be this huge group of people that wanted to get Piggelin in the future because they were vegan. But one could say that IKEA, with their business model, they're kind of sustainable by accident to a point. I'm sure somebody listening from IKEA is going to have an objection to that, but I'm not sure that sustainability was at the top of the minds when they started designing the flat packs. I think there were several other ideas they had ahead of being sustainable. But one of the pros of that model coming out of it is that since everything was flat packed from the beginning and modular, it means that if you break one side, a play in the back or whatever, you can take that back out, obviously, and then you can replace it with something new. You don't have to build an entirely new bookshelf. So IKEA really have it down when it comes to the fundamentals of how you build a circular kind of a product. And at the core of that, you always have to think that the materials you put in have to be separated from each other once the product comes back to you, or once the customer wants to be gone with it. And secondly, if they don't want to be gone with it and it breaks, it needs to be repairable. And that, of course, that's where fast fashion comes in, but that's it.
Right.
That's a big story.
But you're absolutely right about that, because I mean, a circular business model is really only sustainable financially for a company if value can be economically recovered back from the product, either by reusing the product and leasing it or selling it to the next customer, or by breaking it down into components. And there's examples where companies do the first and examples where companies do the second. Like Bosch Power Tools will, when a lease is up, they will take a drill back and they will remanufacture it. They will basically take it apart, look at it, and just basically refurb the entire drill, and they will lease it to the next customer. So they reuse the same product. And some people, like IKEA, they can break it down into components or raw materials. And to me, it kind of looks like you start developing 2 dimensions. And 2 dimensions are always interesting because they can lead to 4 quadrants. As soon as you have 2 dimensions, you can put it down into a quadrant map, and people in management rooms go, this is a familiar visualization.
Actually, finally.
Right.
And
so
anybody
it's like
from McKinsey listening is going to feel at home now, aren't they?
Right. So, and one of those is like, how easy is it to get back the value from the product once you have it in your hands? And that's either reusing or, dismantling it. But another one is, how easy is it to get my product back?
Yeah.
And that's one I think we kind of need to look at, because the way that we've structured waste management in society these days is we're on a purchase-based model where I purchase something, I buy this plastic bottle of water, and then it is up to me. I take on the responsibility for making sure that this is taken care of properly when I'm done with it. And the same thing happens to, cars, the same thing happens to a washing machine, to a drill and everything. And I think for that reason, it isn't always easy to place yourself in that dimension. Like, how easy is it to get my product back? Because there's backlash, from consumers. When businesses go from selling to leasing, when a supplier starts to take more responsibility for the life cycle of the product to make it possible to recover and reuse the materials, retaining product ownership, it also kind of shifts the onus back on the manufacturer to prolong the life cycles designed for recycling, designed for sustainability, as you say. And that isn't always popular with consumers. There's backlash in being a licensee instead of being an owner. You see that with cars, with software, with technological solutions. People want to own the things they pay money for. And there's a great example. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but do they? I mean, yes, they tend to, but not always, right? And I think, and I think you're touching on something really interesting. And I just want to take 2 points away from that. The first one is that if each company becomes responsible for closing the loop on their specific product, all of a sudden you have this huge decentralization of a system that's centrally working, waste management, all the way down to you have to return every individual product to whichever manufacturer it was. It seems like that would turn into an incredibly inefficient system on the whole. And secondly, the idea is that obviously the customers would need to feel inclined to do return that product. And I mean, we tend to do that in the terms of you get paid to return a can, for example, your Coke can, and if you return that within a system in Sweden, you get paid, I think it's like 5 euro cents. So the idea is that you get actually an economical incentive to return things, and that could be done within a certain way. And I just want to, before you continue your thought, which is interesting, I just want to talk about my beloved Adidas references that I always keep coming back with. Now I was going to share my screen. Let's see if that works. We've never done this before, so let's see if it works in this context. What I have now, and everybody that's not watching, you can go onto YouTube and see this. But what I'm showing is an image, hopefully, of an Adidas trainer. It's a Futurecraft Loop, and they're changing the names of this now, so it's not called Futurecraft Loop anymore. But it's a trainer that's made out of one material. So this is TPU, thermopolyurethane plastic, I think it is, and it's made to be recycled. So the idea is that if you return this shoe, everything down to the shoelaces and down to the flugel binders. And if you don't get that reference, do please watch Cocktail, one of the best movies ever done with Tom Cruise, one of the best actors that's ever lived. But everything down to the flugel binder on this Dan shoe, you can see that everything's been done within the same material. And that means that you can actually return it. And it pretty much says, I think here on the top, it says 100% recyclable on the picture, which means that at that point, they want to take ownership of this specific shoe. Let's zoom in, and then you're going to see here 100% recyclable. And then there's a QR code which shows you where you can recycle your shoe. So I think Adidas is kind of playing around with this whole idea of, okay, what happens if the consumer still buys the shoe? It's their shoe, but they have some sort of either economical or sustainability incentive to return it back to us again.
That's really interesting, because what makes the decentralized model appealing is the fact that each company owns its own table of contents. Tesla knows what goes into a Tesla car, and Ford knows what goes into a Ford car. And turning that over to a central waste management facility would require everybody to know what everything is made of all the time. Whereas returning something to the manufacturer, they can then put that back into their industrial process, which is already designed to handle those same parts. So it's basically just like running the industrial process in reverse. But having something like a product like this makes it a lot simpler for that central waste management function, because they don't need to know the table of contents and the list of ingredients for this particular product. So that's really interesting.
And I think that's kind of the problem usually. I mean, if you take your shirt off and you kind of look at the contents, I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before, but one of the problems is that with fabrics today, in general, it tends to be a Frankenstein mix of several different things. It's like cotton, elastine. I have no idea what goes into clothes anymore. But anyways, it's usually a Frankenstein mix of different things that goes into a piece of clothing, which means that if we go back to the two fundamentals that IKEA were doing when it comes to separability and repairability, it's pretty much impossible to separate the fabrics one from each other in your standard piece of clothing. So separability kind of goes out the window. And then, of course, when it comes to repairability, it's not something that generally gets taught anymore, how you repair your own clothes. Maybe it is. Do we still have like woodcraft and sewing in school? Maybe we do.
We do, but I don't necessarily think that the skills are transferable to a modern life as an adult. I think these are, with the risk of alienating teachers who teach these very, very interesting subjects, they're not always thought of as tools for the everyday life. They're thought of as, aesthetic activities that people do in school for fun. And then once they're done, they don't really use those skills anymore.
And I think that's a shame. So, I mean,
absolutely,
if you're a teacher within these fields, you are teaching the future, because I have a big problem seeing how fast fashion is going to be able to comply to these two general principles. And the first one, we can come back to that, because the first one, that there are some answers to that actually, but the second one's kind of interesting when it comes to repairability, because I mean, H&M, they can offer repairability, which they do. But the question is, if you've paid, I don't know what, like 79 crowns for a t-shirt, are you actually going to get that repaired? And if you look on the wide side, you kind of look at the business model in getting that shirt repaired, there's not really that much economics in it. You're not going to be able to build a huge company on the basis of selling a t-shirt for virtually nothing and then getting it repaired. That's just not going to work. So repairability kind of also goes out the window when you've got a fast fashion business model. So the interesting thing is how H&M is approaching this, which is really interesting. And that's the idea behind a Swedish startup called RenewCell. And they do basically the Adidas approach. They have a specific fabric that they can reuse again. So you can actually take back a shirt and you can chemically decompose it and make it to another virgin or, well, recycled piece of fabric that you can then feed back into your processing and then into your production. So the general idea that H&M are chasing right now, which they haven't really achieved at scale yet, but which they're chasing, is the idea of basically the Adidas trainer. So a single fabric, kind of sweater or garment that you then can reuse in the same way that you would with the trainers that Adidas has.
So I'd like to pick your brain about something, and we went through this in episode 2 when we were talking about product life cycles and sustainability and so on, and the idea that kind of longer product life cycles necessarily mean fewer purchases over time, which drives away from a purchase-based business model towards a subscription or lease-based business model. Now you have that on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have the hypothesis with H&M there, which you also kind of gave in the end of that episode, where we can disassociate the idea of having to take care of waste and recycle by making it easier to do that with products. And therefore, we can maintain a purchase-based business model because the product is now recyclable in a way that it wasn't before. Where do you see this going? Are we moving towards products that are more difficult to recycle and a lease-based model where we want them to stay alive for as long as possible because it costs a lot to recycle them? Or do you think we're going to move towards a purchase-based business model where we continue to sell things cheaply and the purchase is the important thing, but the product is more recyclable and so it's easier to retain that value?
Well, I mean, the boring answer is, of course, I'd hope we do both. And I think there's a place for two different companies to take two different positions on this very question. And you could have one of these kind of fast fashion retailers continue doing what they do today if they get the model of getting things back and being able to reuse the same materials over and over again. And you can have the possibility for high-end, really high-end stuff that actually is repairable because there's a secondhand market for those kinds of garments or those kinds of products just in general. So I think this could be just another way of differentiating your things that are more fast fashion-y or more kind of high street fashion-y from each other. So I think that could be actually one really good way of showing the difference between the two. And I think the general idea there is that the stuff that you want to have that lives for a long time is obviously going to need to be even more repairable and separatable than it is today. So the more expensive stuff where you pay more upfront, there's going to be bigger incentives to want to repair them as well. And if you want to if you want to be real about this, I have a hard time seeing that people are going to pay substantially more for their clothes purchases going up in the future. I think we, by tech, have to come up with an idea of making the industry as it stands today a lot more sustainable. And that's where I think H&M is onto something really interesting, because I have a hard time seeing that they're going to change their entire business model to go to something that is where we can repair our own stuff to a much higher degree than we do today. I think it's about consumer behavior. We've kind of gotten used to the whole idea of fast fashion being fast fashion. And if it wasn't unsustainable, it'd be awesome, wouldn't it? I mean,
right.
It's like and this is something that we don't really talk about that much either when it comes to sustainability, and that's affordability. And the idea for the masses to be able to consume and buy things that they haven't done before and do so in a sustainable way is going to be one of the big issues that we're going to have to tackle come, the next 100 years, or next 8 years when it comes to global warming. But it's a continuous battle that we're going with forwards. But I'm just thinking at a municipal standpoint, because this is kind of interesting. You guys, you kind of run behind and clean up all the messes that we come up with as companies every once in a while. What's your take on this whole idea when we start trying, kind of all these new business models and do these things that kind of upset the idea or the standards of how you do waste management and all these things? What are your thoughts on these aspects?
Well, first of all, I have to commend the people who live in this country for recycling to a greater degree than ever. One of the municipal responsibilities in this country is to take care of recycling and waste management. And we notice that we have to empty the recycling containers much more often now than we've ever had to before. And we have more and more problems where people arrive at the recycling container and the recycling container is already chock full of paper packaging, and then they just start dumping their paper packaging on top of the container or next to the container, and then that becomes a sanitation problem. And when it rains, it turns into cardboard mush, and we have to take care of that. But it comes from a good place. People are recycling now more than ever, and that's great. And we want to encourage that. So good on you, people of Sweden. The other thing, the reason I asked the question was because, of course, as municipalities, we are not just the people who take care of the waste. We're also pretty big buyers. We procure and tender a lot of stuff, everything from the food we serve in our schools to the furniture that we have in our, residential, areas for elderly to city halls, buildings, cars. We tender and we procure a lot of stuff. And so we have the ability to make demands on suppliers in a way that a single person cannot, because we don't buy one pair of pants. We buy 15,000 pairs of pants. And so having the courage to drive the development in a particular direction is something which is central to being a municipality, moving toward the future, which is why I'm kind of asking you, what direction do you kind of see everything going, and what should we be helping? In what direction should we be pushing it with our requirements and with our tenders?
And I think this is one thing that keeps coming back from people that are talking about sustainability, is that municipalities and tenders in general, usually they speak about sustainability, but when it comes to the bottom line, it's usually about the almighty dollar. And that's what I mean about affordability. And that is, unless we can have these products and services, the circular or uncircular ones, but the fundamentally more sustainable ones, unless we can have those at a competitive price, we're never going to see mainstream adoption. Because even if municipalities can go ahead and buy 15,000 pairs of pants, it's still going to be, if you approach the pant buying public of any given country as individuals, when you combine all their pant buying needs, it's going to be counted in the millions of pants. So I think that means that you're going to compete with sustainability, sure, but you're always going to compete on price. And I think unless you're willing to come up with an idea or come up with a company where you can have both. We talked about this, I think, in the very first episode, and that's why I want it all tattooed on the inside of my arm, is the idea that we need to be able to make products that are both more sustainable and fundamentally just, at the same price, same quality, same whatever as the products we have today. And usually people call me either a naivist or they applaud me when I talk about this. But for the people that call me a naivist, usually I just say, well, the problem is that there's so few people that are seeing the benefits of sustainability. It's an ever-growing, it's an ever-growing it's an ever-growing public group of people. But if we count the Earth's population, it's still a really, really small percentage of the world's population that are seeing and acting on these problems. So we just need to compete with better products that are better and more sustainable. And that's what I keep coming back to. So I think, municipalities need to tender. They need to think about sustainability. And I think what's important is that they need to push whatever products and whatever technologies that they think could be beneficial for, of course, the consumers that they have, but also the customers, the people that are delivering the tender. So you actually help these innovative companies that can come up with new solutions. So
well, let me give you an example. Say that I need to buy bookshelves for a number of schools. I need to buy 500 bookshelves, and I can either buy a really cheap bookshelf, like you said, from IKEA, which is going to fall apart in a classroom environment. And there's not bad on IKEA. It's just classroom environments are really demanding on furniture because kids climb on top of them, which they're not always designed for when they're made of particle board. So either you buy, cheap furniture, which you have to change a lot, or you buy really durable furniture, which is really expensive, or you could, can you drive towards a different business model and tell a furniture company, we want to buy furniture as a service? And then it's up to you. If it breaks, you pay to replace it. If it lasts forever, we pay every month and you don't have to do anything. And by, shifting toward that model, maybe we're encouraging companies that have a more sustainable business model. So I'm not just talking about how we choose different products, but using our tenders and our procurements to encourage business models.
I think asked and answered would be my first my first reaction to that. I think what you're suggesting is of course really interesting, and the reason why I don't come up with it is because of my own preconceived notions of municipalities always going to what they've always done, which is, okay, we did this tender last year, we're going to do this tender again this year. And I'm just seeing municipalities as being unfundamentally capable of innovating their purchasing processes. And
I took that personally,
which you should. So I think the cool thing is that if you as a purchaser could do and ask those kinds of demands when you do tenders, sure, you would see things differently. And I think the cool thing, and that's where we started when I said that capitalism isn't necessarily the problem, or isn't the problem, consumerism is. And I think if we now try and tie this thing together and say, okay, so if we as consumers, municipalities or personal or company wise, doesn't matter, as consumers, if we basically say we want to have a product that lasts forever, and we want to have some sort of a circular idea, and we want to have some sort of a subscription based idea, which means that we're willing to pay a subscription based fee, and then we'll just rent this. The thing is, if a company then that owns it, rather than selling it to you where it moves from my balance sheet to your balance sheet, it stays on my balance sheet, all of a sudden I need to take care of it, just as you said. And at that point, if it isn't, if you can't separate the stuff and you can't repair it, it's going to be a fundamentally bad thing, because I want it to stick with you forever. I mean, because as you said, the longer you just pay for it and the less you have to repair it, the more profits I'm going to make. So that's the cool thing with the idea of having something as a service rather than selling something. Because the worst thing that can happen if I sell you something and it moves from my balance sheet to your balance sheet is that it comes back to mine again, because I have no system to do that. The system for doing that is just, okay, crap, it needs to be regulated by law. And the idea is that you have certain rights as a consumer by law to return it to me if it's a faulty product. Then usually what happens is I have the right to repair it, but more than often I'll just give you a new one. And the thing is, if we just move that basic idea, is that it's going to stay on my balance sheet. It's going to be up to me to be able to keep it, as you say, in great shape, to be able to use it forever. So having these models where you have a consumer that's willing to pay for something on a monthly basis rather than owning it, where you subscribe to the basic ideas of that things need to be, you can separate them and you can repair them, then we move beyond the idea of capitalism being something that is fundamentally bad for sustainability into something that is driving a sustainable shift. Because all of a sudden, my capitalist needs of making more money as a company is being fed by by renting you a product that's going to last forever with as few repairs as possible. And when it needs to be repaired, it needs to be repaired and not replaced by a new unit, because that's going to eat into my profit margins. So I think you're of course, you're saying something incredibly interesting. I'm still yet to see a municipality making that tender. Maybe it's just me being narrow-minded.
Well, let's throw that challenge out to myself in Huddinge, to my 289 colleagues out there in Sweden. Let's see if we can prove you wrong in the near future. But I think we have it there, Gus. That's an excellent conclusion to sum this up with.
I think it's awesome. I think it's been a great discussion. Maybe it became a little bit lopsided. So I would like for everybody to listen to this episode to post something really cool on the board for what you want us to talk about next time, that is really in the municipal kind of wheelhouse. So we get Andy's perspectives on those, because his are generally far more thought through than mine are. So that's going to be a far superior episode to this one. So I'm urging everybody to comment and post and like and do all the things, so we can get a really epic version of this podcast.
An epic soliloquy is what you're looking for next time. We'll see what we can do.
That's what we're going for.
Well, thank you very much for the compliments, and thanks everybody out there for listening. It's been great to be able to share these discussions with you guys and to look at the comments and everything coming in. So as Gus says, please do hit us with your ideas, with your comments. If you think we're full of wisdom, tell us. If you think we're full of something else, tell us, and we'll make sure to do a better job for you next time.
Yeah, and as I keep saying, I think we're full of something. So, but and then, as you said, it's up to everybody else to kind of make their minds up, isn't there? Awesome, guys. Until next time, have a good one.